Hey guys, this is a really important topic I'm going to do now. Why was the death penalty abolished? Okay, now when you get questions like this, make sure that you are totally clear with your factors for the end of the death penalty, and then you need to know why there was a declining trend in executions, and then also miscarriages of justice. But I'll go through everything you need in this video. So your factors to start with are people's attitudes, the government, individuals, especially for miscarriages of justice, technology and the role of technology, and then religion. Okay, so why was the death penalty abolished? First of all, a declining trend in executions. So you know that by the late 1700s the death penalty was already in decline, and by the 1820s and 30s the bloody code was almost finished. With the ending of public executions in 1868, the death penalty really became something that was used for serious criminals only. So it was only really used for things like murder and treason. Hanging stopped in 1868 in public, and then from about 1840 you only saw about 15 or so executions a year, and it was usually for murder or for serious crimes. Okay, so you know that there was a declining trend in executions, and there's your information that you can pull into your answer. Some really straightforward dates, like by the 1820s and 30s the bloody code was almost gone. By 1868 public executions had stopped, that kind of thing. By 1840 only 15 executions a year. Now, in 1957 hanging was abolished for all murders except for the following: the murder of a policeman, murder by shooting or explosion, resisting arrest, which led to murder, theft, and multiple murders. So realistically, from about 1957, you're only really dealing with serious murders and murder of police or terrorist activity, bombs and explosions and things. It's worth just making a note of why was murder by shooting any worse than poison and strangulation. But irrespective, that's the decision that the law made. Okay? It's worth mentioning religious opposition to the death penalty. It's something that you can bring into an answer. Religious people said that the death penalty goes against what the Bible said: "Thou shalt not kill." Another reason is the impact of World War II. So if you've been studying the Germany units, then you know the atrocities and the horrors that the Nazis carried out in the Holocaust. And even just through things like Kristallnacht. In 1948, the UN produced a Declaration of Human Rights, which basically said that human life is sacred. So you can't miss out the impact of World War II. The horrific things that were done to the Jews and other minorities by the Nazis had a real impact on people. Okay, so why was the death penalty abolished? Declining trend in executions. By 1957, the death penalty is abolished for most crimes apart from these. Religious opposition, the impact of World War II, and then perhaps the most important one is the miscarriages of justice. Now, I've been teaching my class to remember three names that I want you to go into that exam with. Okay, the first one is Derek Bentley. I won't go through each of these. You can go onto the internet and read all about them, but the basics are that Derek Bentley was convicted for the murder of PC Sidney Miles. He did not shoot the police officer. It was his friend Christopher Craig, who was too young to be tried for murder. Derek Bentley got found guilty and executed under what's called joint enterprise. So basically, if two people go and commit a crime together and one of them commits a murder, they can both be convicted for it. It's a law that was in force until very, very recently. So Derek Bentley didn't shoot the police officer, but he was found guilty of the murder and he was executed. Christopher Craig went to jail because he was under the age of 18 for about 12 years, I think, and then was released. Timothy Evans, if you watch 10 Rillington Place on TV, you'll know about this one. Really good TV show. Timothy Evans was a lodger in the house of John Christie, a famous serial killer. And he got implicated in the murder of his wife. I won't go into the details of it because it's quite hard to explain, but you can read all about it on the internet. He was hanged. He was innocent. And actually, only when they caught up with John Christie and they started finding bodies under his floorboards and buried in his garden, did they realise that Timothy Evans was innocent. So he was another person that was hanged for a crime he didn't commit. And then the last one is Ruth Ellis, and she was the last woman to be hanged in England in 1956. She was found guilty of shooting her husband, David Blakely, and he was an abusive husband who used to beat her and treat her really badly. I'm not going to do a video on domestic violence and domestic abuse, but it is something that sometimes you get in the exam, so it's worth maybe just looking in your revision guide or seeing what there is on the internet for it. Ruth Ellis is a perfect example. Okay, now when it comes to the death penalty being abolished, I think that this kind of question, you could get an explain question, so explain why the death penalty was abolished, and you could use each of the points I've talked about for P paragraphs. Try and mix it up, don't just talk only about miscarriages of justice, talk about declining trend of executions, religious attitudes, impact of World War II. Or you could get a question that goes along the lines of evaluation style things. So the death penalty was abolished because of miscarriages of justice. How far do you agree? Okay, so you need to be really ready for this question on the exam. The last thing I want to talk about is arguments for and against the death penalty. Now, this isn't a cultural studies exam, so you don't want to fall into the trap of thinking that you can just talk about arguments for and against the death penalty. Make sure you answer the question, okay? But if you do get a question that talks about arguments for and against the death penalty, I've just summarised them very quickly for you here. So arguments for, it's a deterrent, even though I don't think it is. Imprisonment is expensive. Criminals can commit crime again. So you put a murderer in jail for 10 years, they come out, they commit another murder. Is that something that you want? And then finally, it avenges the victim. Okay. Arguments against, other countries banned executions and crime didn't go up. Okay, so for example, countries like Russia have banned the death penalty and their crime hasn't gone up that much. You can have mistakes, people can make mistakes. What do you do if you execute someone? So for example, Timothy Evans, he's not coming back. Murder is a spur of the moment thing, it's not planned. There's a lot of research into murder that says that these aren't planned out things and that most victims actually know their murderer. And finally, execution is against a religion, and you've got the religious and moral arguments that say life is, sacred, the sanctity of life argument. It's no one's right to take someone else's life. Okay, so that is your little video on why the death penalty was abolished. Make sure when you go into the exam you know these three people for miscarriages of justice, and make sure that you've got a nice sort of overview of the reasons why you get a decline in executions, hanging being abolished for all but very, very serious crimes in 1957. Remember your factors, because they really are your clue to how to answer the question, and hopefully that should give you a really good overview.